Right. So I'm back from a long hiatus because I was on holiday. Um, but this recent for this book summary, covering today we're covering Yuko Tsushima's Child of Fortune. Trying to wow, look at that. Woo. Yuko Tsushima's Child of Fortune. Um, Basically the way I actually found out about this book is what I did was I was at a library in Auckland. I was at Takapuna Library in Auckland, and they had this on a cart of free books. And so, I picked it up. I saw it, I was like, oh, Penguin Classics. I'll never reject, a Penguin Classics book. And I saw it, and I was like, yeah. And then I looked at because I always check you always check the front to see the biography. And I looked, and it said it was the daughter of Osamu Dazai who wrote, No Longer Human and The Setting Sun, which are both very great books. And I was like, wow, I really need to check this person out. And so, I took the book and I got to reading it. I mean, it's not a long book. This was like my plane book on my flight. It's about 150 pages, and it was it was quite an interesting book. It was really different to sort of lots of the stuff that I read normally. Basically, what it was, what it's about is it's this sort of parenthood story about a single mother, the main character called Hoko, or I think in Japanese it's like Koko, because it's like a long O. Long O. I don't want to be, I don't want to get this wrong, but I'm just gonna call it Coco for now because it's just easier. But it's about the main character Coco and sort of her, her sort of kind of dealing with parenthood. So what she does is I think she's in her mid to late 30s, and she's a single mother, so she has a child. She teaches piano lessons as her main job, and it's, I mean, lots of these stories, normally it'd be sort of like if you're reading a book, it's normally like a sort of hopeful, something, hopeful sort of an uplifting story about a single mother, working hard to provide for her, for her daughter. And in this book, that's just sort of not how it is. The book is kind of it's sort of like cripplingly, like it is. It's just it's very very realistic in the sort of dreary kind of like, oh, this is real life kind of sense. Because what happens is Coco is the sort of detached mother who is part of, she attempts to make her daughter's life better, and she really loves her daughter. Her daughter, Kayako, who is a central character in the book. He really loves her, but there's this sort of neglect that goes around her because while Coco she tries to give her give her love, she's also quite cold sometimes. Like sometimes when Kyoko needs her, she's not really there for her. At points she seems quite like emotionally distant. And Kayako, like one of her dreams is basically to go to this nice private like Catholic school. And then Coco doesn't really like she attempts, but she never really succeeds. And so Kayako ends up sort of just staying with her older sister, who's 7 years older, Shoko, and living with her basically as sort of like a semi-adopted child. And she goes over to Coco's house, periodically to see her mother. And so the story, while Kayako is the sort of central figure, to Coco, who's the main character, she's this kind of like sort of, but she's also kind of relegated as this non-human kind of entity that Coco sort of just worships as like, the idea of her child. Like this is, she's like, oh, this is my child, kind of thing. She doesn't really sort of see like Kayako, for sort of what she is, I guess. And the story is mainly focused on her affairs. So there's this really like mucked up, kind of messed up relationship with her ex-husband Hatanaka, and who she had Kayako with. And after leaving Hatanaka, she kind of bounces around. So she is in love with Doi, this other guy, but and she tries to, she tries really hard for Kayako to sort of accept him as, a father figure. Um, but Doi also has a wife and two kids. And so Coco's like sort of she trying to make this like weird relationship, this cheating relationship work. But it doesn't really, because Doy's not really serious about uh being being in a relationship and being married. He doesn't want to leave his like his old relationship, but he's constantly he's going on affairs with Coco. He's leaving his family saying, "Oh, I'm going on a business trip," so that he can hang out with Kayako and Coco. And he makes these really snide remarks, which are quite off-putting, where he sort of just says, it's like, yeah, have another child. Like he sort of encourages Coco. He's like, yeah, I'll have another child with you, because to him it's not really a big deal. And this whole point of having a second child becomes the main plot of the story. So it's like while Coco lives this mundane lifestyle, she becomes obsessed with this idea of having another child. And part of it, this is the sort of psychological part, up to the viewer, up to the reader. But it's sort of her desire to have a child leads to this fake pregnancy. Spoilers, by the way. And leads to this fake pregnancy where um basically Coco has all the symptoms of becoming pregnant. So she starts putting on weight. She gets a ravenous appetite. She starts to get sick, and all these symptoms of pregnancy, you know that manifest, which eventually result in her going to the hospital to get a checkup. She considers getting an abortion, and she sort of, well, she flashes back to her past as a child when she gets an abortion as a 24-year-old for the first time, not really making a big deal out of it. But she sort of decides to want to become a mother again, but in a way that is sort of unbeknownst to her, because she wants to be a because the doctor says that this stems from the psychological desire to want something, want a child. It comes from the desire to like to be a mother, or to do something. But she's confused. She's saying, she thinks to herself like, why? And she thinks part of it is, and I think one of the most interesting parts of the story is this part where she sort of states that she's on her balcony, and she overlooks the university from which she can see from her balcony. And she thinks of the students during the university time, her university time. And she thinks of them, throwing rocks at riot police. And thinks of sort of everything she does to her becomes sort of that act of throwing the stone. So lots of things she does becomes this form of resistance towards it. You know, the like sleeping with, the breaking leaving her husband initially, wanting to raise Kaiko on her own, sort of pursuing her own life. Even though, it's like scorned by the rest of her family. There's also, the part where she um what's it? She like yeah, but it's really interesting. Like, just sort of what she thinks. And part of it, she also, thinks, states it's like part of her sort of childhood trauma. Because there are also these flashbacks to when, her childhood. It's growing up as like a post-war child, like a post-Second World War child, of having you know, a mentally disabled brother and an absent father, and that sort of plays into it. And she sort of just like she kind of goes into the trenches of her mind, and she thinks, why, you know, because Osamu Dazai, and again, I read somewhere that it's bad to read this as autobiography. That's something you should never. I think is bad. Like, I'm not trying to link this to Yuko Tsushima, the author herself. Like, these are just characters. But there is this thing of the absent father that does sort of closely resemble, Osamu Dazai sort of being an absent kind of father in Tsushima's life. And there's also the fact that, I don't know about the disabled brother thing. I haven't really researched biography. This is just going after, straight after reading the book, basically. And um yeah, like but she has this disabled brother who she keeps sort of harkening back to. And she represents the sort of pureness of life that's undiluted by all the troubles and the terrible elements of society. Like, even though he's disabled and he's looked down upon by everyone else, what she sees in her brother is just this pure, unadulterated joy that is not even present in her, in her own daughter, Kayako, who she says sort of adopts the fake mannerisms of all, the adults around her, all the lies, all the doing things to cover up what she hates. Like, so she thinks back to her brother and sort of she has this trauma about him dying early. He dies at a very young age. And sort of that also plays into this idea of sort of her wanting to have another child, which she states is like sort of partly why she might have, manifested this pregnancy, was so Kayako could have a brother like with her, that so she could grow up, like pure around. So, but the entire story is just it's not an uplifting sort of optimistic story. The book ends sort of around around this character Osara, who becomes a really important character near the end of the book. What he does initially is he's an intermediary between Hatsunaka and Koko about the daughter, because Hatsunaka wants to be a part of Koko's life, a part of Hayako's life, even though they're divorced and Koko doesn't really want him to go near her. And so Osada, their mutual friend, becomes this intermediary. But in being an intermediary, what he also does is every time he visits Coco, he sleeps with her. And they have this really weird, sort of unromantic, like loveless, sexless sex. It's this really weird, like, because she describes Osada as this like prepubescent boy. Like he's this antisocial kind of prepubescent man who hasn't fully matured. Unlike Hatanaka, who's sort of the exact opposite. He's this like he's a swindler, really charismatic guy who gets with all the women and blah 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 and all that. And so yeah, and so also he becomes this intermediary and he sleeps, with Coco, and that's what leads her initially to thinking, that she's pregnant with Osada's child. But what happens is that she discovers that her pregnancy is fake, and then she breaks the news to Osada. She says, this isn't your child. Like, yeah, and so what happens after that is that basically, yeah, so like, or she's like breaks it. She's like, oh, this isn't your child, Osada. And so he's kind of like he's shocked and all that. And then, but eventually, what they do is they make this meetup with Osada and Hatanaka, who she hasn't seen in years, right? With Coco and like all those three. And Osada's basically like, like I feel like you're really missing a man in your life. Like this is what all this pregnancy stuff is about. Like, this is clearly you're trying to signal that you need a husband. And so like that's why you're having all these pregnancy cravings. This is why you want a baby. And like Coco, she walks away from it. She's basically Sam Simmons. It's like, nah, like this isn't what it's about. Like the fact that you guys think, oh, like you guys are trying to push this on me and you're making it my fault, basically. And so she leaves. And but it's not in a sort of triumphant manner. She stumbles out, it's this weird kind of awkward thing. And then after she meets this boy, at the end she meets this boy in an alley who's playing with a toy gun, and she plays dead with him, and then she like hugs him and doesn't let go until he like gets really scared, and then he's like, okay, okay, let me go, like, and then she lets him go, and she sort of stands there and kind of looks across, and she's like, and she sees just the world, and she's like, huh, and that's how it ends. it's just like it's a really anticlimactic ending, and like you know, I think, and I'm not the one probably the person to speak on this, but you can probably interpret sort of book in many manners. I mean, obviously, you can. There's like I said, there's the autobiographical approach, which I don't think is necessarily very productive. Um, but I think it is sort of. Well, I don't look. I don't want to slap a label. I don't want to say it's like a feminist book, but I think it is quite a, I guess, a triumphant book about a female hero. Like Coco's not the strong sort of like female hero or protagonist, of a book. Like she's not. She's this weird, flawed, kind of broken character. I mean, if anything, Shoko, her sister, is probably a more admirable character who tries to take in Kayako and to sort of, try and, improve things. But Coco sort of just stumbles, through everything she does. But she does everything her way. And that's an important thing. She doesn't acquiesce, to what other people demand of her. And and she tries to take her life into her own hands and Kayako's life into her own hands through her relationships, through her relationship with Doi, with Osada, Hatanaka. She sort of lives life on her own terms and sets her own boundaries, which upsets people, but that's the way it is. And so yeah, I think the book is, I wouldn't say, I don't think it's like a big like must read, but I do think it gives a really interesting and sort of like nuanced look on a sort of atypical, like sort of female, well, sort of an atypical narrative, right? Like it's a very real. It's a book that feels at some points like too real. It's all the characters are flawed. It's a book full of like these horrible people. Um, and but in that sense, I guess it's beautiful in that sense, in the sense that everyone's flawed and people make mistakes and then weird things happen, and it's just yeah. But I would rate this. I'd probably give this book like a rating of like um maybe like a 6 to like a 7. I don't know. Like it's it was an interesting reading experience. But I wouldn't say like this is like a great amazing piece of literature. It's like, oh, you must read it. Like, nah, this is probably going on my bookshelf. I don't think I'm gonna pick it up anytime soon. Um, but it was an interesting read, and it's certainly a book that I will remember. Um, and I think I might. I mean, honestly, for me, this is probably controversial. But it was more interesting than the bell jar for me because it's But like, yeah. But anyways, that's my sort of my thought dump on it. It's a kind of incoherent sort of spill. But hey, we're back, and I need to break the ice again on my YouTube upload. I need to like upload something because my YouTube's been starving. So yeah. But anyways, yeah. Thanks for watching.